Good morning, everyone. Architect Dhruva is a geo-evangelist and CEO at GeoSpock. He has several years' experience in geospatial technologies and experience of working in diverse markets. Dhruva is a visionary, innovative, and transformational leader with keen ability to help position companies for innovation and profitable growth through deeper business insights while leveraging geospatial technologies. He has demonstrated a strong track record of success across several industrial verticals spanning technology, retail banking and insurance, utilities, image processing using satellites and drones. He has extensive expertise in developing and leading international and domestic projects and strategic alliances, an expert in creating and leading an innovation-driven culture and new product development. Architect Dhruva has won several awards, including the Top 10 Geospatial Entrepreneurs in India in 2016. He has recently been leading several projects in the commercial GIS space across NBFCs, retail, FMCG companies. Outside of work, Architect Dhruva is a busy dad and spends time away from the city in the weekends. Thank you.
One small correction. Actually, he's not an architect. Sorry, Dhruva.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
So, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the introduction, Saundarya. So, my name is Dhruva, and as she mentioned, I've been essentially into the GIS space for the last almost 10-12 years. So, I'm going to talk today about what is GIS, what is geospatial, what is digital mapping, and then we'll cover some applications in architecture specifically, as you are all studying architecture. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So that is the structure of today's presentation. So first, let's start off with what is GIS. So some of you who may have heard it or may not have heard it, GIS stands for Geographic Information System. What that really means is, like Arnold Schwarzenegger said, it's kind of like Google Earth, but better. It's essentially representing data on a map. But as we'll discover today, it's a lot more about the actual insights you get rather than the map itself. This is an interesting story. So this guy is called the father of GIS. His name is Roger Tomlinson. And he says the early days of GIS was very lonely. No one knew what it meant. And in fact, the reason I put this quote is because even today, many people don't know what GIS means. People think it's Google Maps or Google Earth. But hopefully today, at the end of the presentation, you'll realize that GIS is much, much more than just Google Maps. So a little bit about me. So Saundarya gave an introduction. I just want to add a couple of things. I am actually the founder of a company called GeoSpock, and we make maps and mapping tools. And so that's my job day to day. I work with a lot of mapping data and create many applications that we'll talk about today. So let's get into what is geospatial. So GIS or geospatial technology is actually 66% information and only 33% maps. So only 1/3 of geospatial actually involves mapping. Many of you may be surprised by that, but actually mapping is only a way to communicate the analysis. The actual value of what geospatial can do is the analysis itself. So by asking questions about the phenomena of landscape, we are using computers to actually display the results as maps. And as the quote says, only occasionally we use maps. In many cases, maps are not even visible to the end user when the analysis is done. So what does GIS actually mean? It means you're solving problems with spatial components and you're finding spatial patterns, correlations, and then you're filtering and processing that data and developing systems that can use this data in a smart way. Now that's a big definition. So let's unpick what each of that means. And the first thing is spatial patterns. So what do I mean by spatial patterns? And I'm going to show you some maps which are very, very interesting. And then we can, discuss about some of these. So this is a map that Facebook published. This is a couple of years ago now. And if you can guess, this is actually the active locations of Facebook accounts across the world. And the lines represent the friends and the locations of friends of those people who live in each of those areas. As you can see, I think one of the obvious things that immediately stands out here is that the less populated areas have very few active accounts. So if you look at the Sahara, or if you look at the Amazon area, or if you look at any of the oceans, there's no bright dots. So this data is actually using 500 million Facebook accounts and actually mapping that onto a global map. Another very, very interesting thing which you may or may not have noticed is that there's very few accounts in China. And this is because Facebook actually is banned in China, or was until recently, and Russia. So Russia also has very few accounts. So this kind of spatial pattern actually gives you insight which you can't get anywhere else. So just by looking at Facebook data, this is not immediately visible, but the moment you see it on a map, it becomes very, very interesting. Another really interesting map that I've used in the past is the most photographed places in the world. Again, if you look at the similarity between this map and the other map, you'll notice that it's the same thing, right? The most densely populated places in the world are very often the most photographed places in the world. The only slight exception to that is obviously the east of Australia, where the population is not very high, but they have very scenic beaches, and therefore there's a lot of hotspots there. But generally you'll see that there's a lot of photographs in places where there's a lot of population. And more recently, you may have seen this kind of map, which is the COVID-19 dashboard. This is the global dashboard. There are many India-specific dashboards as well. But again, this is an example of representing complex data that is changing over time on a map. And by looking at the map, you're immediately able to get insights. Insights like which are the areas where there's most number of infections, which are the areas where the virus is spreading, where are the areas where there's most recovery. So COVID-19 has actually given a lot of importance to mapping, and many of you would have been seeing maps every day of your city, of your country, of the world, showing where the cases of COVID are increasing or decreasing. So spatial patterns is essentially how do I look at data on a map and uncover the pattern that it's trying to convey to me. And the really important thing to take away from spatial patterns is that this sort of representation of data is not possible in any other technology. You can only do it with mapping data. You cannot do it with Excel, or you cannot do it with PowerPoint. So what is correlation? So we spoke about patterns. The next thing in the definition was correlations. So what do I mean by correlation? Anybody who studied statistics or understand basic of regression means correlation just generally means that if I have a variable X and another variable Y, if X goes up, does Y also go up, or does Y come down? So that's what correlation means. And in mapping terminology, correlation looks at spatial variation. So spatial essentially means the location and how it varies. So I'll show you a quick comparison of maps to give you an idea of what I mean. So the map on the left, so this is Manchester, which is in the UK. Map on the left shows you percent of residents with level 4 qualifications or above. So what that means is areas which are shaded in purple, like dark purple, it means that there's a high percentage of people with higher degree qualification, right? That means that they have completed masters or they've graduated basically. So that is a map on the left. If you look at the map on the right, that's showing you percent of residents that are employed in manufacturing. So what does this say? This is meaning that every brown area that you see means that there are high percentage of that population who are employed in manufacturing work, which means what? Basically low level jobs, which is mostly that people who are not very well educated will be taking up. And if you compare the two maps, actually it's very interesting, right? Areas where there is high percentage of good qualified people is inversely proportional to the area where people are employed in manufacturing, which is another way of saying is that where manufacturing hubs are, you don't find people who are very highly educated. So this is an example of correlation, and there are many correlations that you can do. So for example, with COVID data, we are looking at how actually the comorbidity effect is actually influencing death rates. So in areas where there's already high prevalence of cancer, where is the death rate higher or lower than areas where there is not? So that's another example of correlation. We use it in retail. So in retail, Starbucks is only going to open a shop in a place where people can afford to buy a 200 rupee coffee, right? So again, you need to use correlation, and Starbucks actually uses this technology to figure out which is the best place to open a coffee shop based on what is the income in the area, what is the level of affluence, where are the businesses, so that kind of thing. The next thing in the definition was processing data. So we've covered visualization or spatial patterns. Then we saw correlation. How do you correlate different variables? Now the next one is how do you process that data? So the output was what we saw, but how do we get to that output, right? So one example that we can show you here is processing. So this is again a specific example that I picked up around architecture, not building, but in case you're building a road or you're constructing a bridge, this is the kind of cross section that you need to create in order to complete. So this is more civil architecture, and in civil, one of the biggest issues or one of the biggest data sets that they need is elevation profile. So this is actually showing you the elevation profile of what is the cross section of that bridge, and the cross section is obtained by drawing a line across that area of interest and retrieving that elevation profile. Now, what is the geospatial aspect in this? The geospatial aspect is that first I need an elevation model of that area. Now, what is an elevation model? An elevation model basically tells you what is the variation of height across your area of survey or your area of construction. And the height is obtained through different mechanisms. So you can do a land survey, or you can do a drone survey, or you can get this from satellite data. Once you get the elevation model, then you can run a tool, which is basically called elevation profile, which creates this kind of graph. So this graph is telling me what is the profile area, what is the difference in the area between the constructed and the design. So this is very useful for a planner or a designer when construction is happening to be able to build better and more efficient designs. So if you have a very accurate elevation model, you can ensure that the design outcome makes use of that elevation. And in sustainable architecture, and as you may be studying already, there are important principles about the terrain and the land that you need to take into account when you're building or designing an urban landscape. So this is an example of doing that. The next one is spatial modeling. So people may have heard of what modeling means. So modeling essentially is taking data and predicting or creating a model that may predict what might happen with that data in the future. So people are building models around, the most common model is next purchase model. So this you see in Amazon. So I'm sure when you log on to Amazon, you buy something, it will say customers who bought this also, or since you bought this, you may want to consider buying this. So that is a model that is looking at your past data and then trying to predict what you might buy in the future. You can do the same thing with location data. And one example of a spatial model is called a sleuth model. You can go and check out what sleuth model actually does. But the outcome of a sleuth model looks something like this. It says, based on the past 10, 15, 20 years of development of a city, what is the next 5, 10 years going to look like? And this is important for in an urban planning context, because you need to know, okay, which way does the city look like it's going to grow, so that we can plan infrastructure properly. Now in India, we're very guilty of, or the government is very guilty of not being, in a good situation to plan. And that's because they've not been using models to help them figure out where cities might grow. And this map is showing me what is the probability of development from 0 to 100% based on the extent of development. So the brown color is what already exists. So that is what is existing today. And we're projecting into the future to say which are the areas which might start developing more. And as you can expect, the orange areas are just around the brown areas, which means, okay, these are the areas which will likely develop immediately in the next few years. But slightly further down, what are the other areas which might, look at developing? And some of the things you may notice here is there are linear patterns, and linear patterns basically indicate that there's a road that's connecting between two towns, and therefore that's where the development might happen. But there are multiple parameters that a sleuth model can take into account, and you can go and visit that website, or you can even search on, online for the sleuth model. So we've covered what is geospatial mean, what are the different components. Now you may be thinking, okay, why is Dhruva talking about all of these things? How is it relevant to architecture, and what is it that I need to know? So let's cover that in the next section. So first thing is basic. So what is geospatial? Geospatial means you're layering multiple types of data. And in the geospatial world, you have only two types of data, which is convenient for us to understand. The first is vector data, and the second is raster data, and we'll cover both. But what you need to understand is vector and raster data together makes a model of the real world. So just like in architecture, you may have 3D objects that build up your building. In geospatial, you have these two types of objects. They could be 3D or 2D, but that combination of these two types of layers is actually giving a representation of the real world. So what is a raster? A raster data model is essentially a representation of the world divided into a regular grid of cells or pixels. And what is the simplest example of raster data? It's satellites. Satellite imagery is an example of raster data. There are many other types of raster data actually. So satellites, for those of you who don't know, actually come in 4 or 5 different ways. The imagery comes in 4 or 5 different ways. What you see on Google Earth is RGB, which is red, green, blue, which is the visible spectrum. There's another type of information which is the near infrared, which is a multispectral image. Now, near infrared is very useful because the near infrared reflectance tells you the chlorophyll content in vegetation. So if you've ever done a land use classification map, that typically uses a near infrared band to be able to find where is water, where is land, where is green, where is buildings. Because on an image, it's much harder to, on a normal image, which is RGB, it's much harder to do that. Then there is hyperspectral. So hyperspectral is thousands of bands. So in RGB, I have only 3 bands. In multispectral, I may have 4 to 7 bands. In hyperspectral, I have 1000 bands. And why do I need 1000 bands? You need it because if you want to figure out how much mineral content is there in the soil, or what is the iron ore content on the soil, so hyperspectral can give you answers to that. And then the last type of satellite image is radar. So radar actually is not an image technically, it's just a signal backscatter. But radar is being used more and more today because any satellite other than radar can get blocked by clouds. So if it's raining or if it's a cloudy day, satellite actually can't take pictures. The reason you see seamless coverage in Google Earth is because they've actually done a lot of processing. They've removed all the pictures that had clouds in them and then stitched all the pictures that didn't have clouds, and that's how they fill in the gaps. But radar doesn't matter because it penetrates the cloud, and it doesn't matter whether it's night or day, so I can take images at any point in time. So that's raster. So raster is a grid and it has pixels. That's what's important to know. The next type is vector. So vector is a representation of the real world, whereas raster was a picture, right? An actual image. Representation of the real world in point, line, and polygon. And if you think about any vector feature, even in architecture, it's the same. In architecture, you have arcs. In GIS, you don't have arcs. You just have points, lines, and polygons. So a point is a coordinate, which is a latitude, longitude typically, but it can be any coordinate, as you see 0, 0 here. A line is 2 points that are connected. So a 0, 0 and a 1, 0 connected. And a polygon is multiple lines connected to each other. So that's a very simple way to do it. But let's take it a little further and see what are the representations of these lines and points and vectors. So a raster view of the world is on the left and a vector view of the world is on the right. And in the middle is what actually we are looking at. And let's go through this one by one because it's a little complicated. So you have, for example, Happy Valley, which is a, let's say, a resort. And Happy Valley Resort, you have hotels spread across the resort. So how do you represent that in an image? In an image, basically you see on the left, it's a grid and some of those colored points represents the location of those hotels. On the right, you have a vector representation, which is on a coordinate graph, you have dots. Same way, if you look at a ski lift, right? A ski lift is a line. On a vector, it looks like what you would see, a pixelated image, right? Pixels that fill up the line. On a raster, sorry, on a vector, it's a line, and on a raster, it looks like a pixelated line. What about polygons? So you have a forest area or a lake, which is the next one. So that is represented as a cluster of pixels for a raster, but on a vector, it's actually a set of lines that is enclosed in a polygon. So this is an example of how representation happens in the real world. So we've covered a lot of main fundamental principles and theory around geospatial. Now let's look at how these actually apply in the real world. Yeah. So the first one is architecture, because that's what you guys are interested in. So let's look at what are the applications in architecture. First one is urban planning. So I'm sure you may even have a course of urban planning or at least a elective that you could take in urban planning. So urban planning is by far the biggest application of geospatial data in architecture. Every urban planner today uses maps to figure out what kind of development is in the area. How do you classify that development? So the chart that you see on the right is different types of urban development. So parks or residential or office or shops, that kind of thing. And the reason urban planning requires maps is obviously because if you have a large area, it's not a single building, so you need to figure out how these buildings interact with each other. And the best way to do that is to use a map. But beyond urban planning, there are many, many other applications for architecture, and I'll run through some of that today. So I don't know if any of you have heard the concept of geodesign. So I want to spend a couple of minutes on what is geodesign. And geodesign is important to understand because that's the sort of meeting point between architecture and geospatial. So this is from a landscape perspective, but it could be equally applicable from a building perspective. So question one is, how should the landscape be described? So in the sense, how should it be represented? So should it be represented in a full 3D model? Should it be represented with what colors? What is the textures, right? That kind of thing. The next question is, how does the landscape operate, right? How does it function? So that's a process model. And the process model is important because the function of what that building is or what that landscape is essentially driven by that process. Next question is the landscape working well? So evaluation model. So we saw some of those sleuth models in the past. So how do you actually evaluate whether it's working? It's not. What is not working? What is working? And if it's not working, or even if it is, how can the landscape be altered by your own actions or maybe by external influences? So like a flood or like a storm. And if it is altered, what sort of differences might it cause? So what is the impact of that change? And if that impact is severe, should the landscape be changed? And this is an iterative model. So as you can see, the feedback happens. And that's the most important thing about the geodesign framework. So put it in a kind of simple way. If you're designing a building and you're creating, let's say, a 20-floor building, geodesign will ask you to design that, put it in a real world model, and see if you build a 20-floor model, how much shadow does it cast in the area around? What is the demand on water that it puts on the municipality? How much parking do you need? And if you made that building into a 23-floor building, what does that change? And if it made into a 15-floor building, what is the impact? Or if there's a storm that comes, what is the safeguard that you need to take? And that's the whole principle of geodesign. And the reason it's important in architecture is because as architects, you often are concerned about the aesthetics and the actual building, but are you also looking at what is the impact on the surrounding environment? And that's where the geospatial aspect comes in. So let's look at some real world industries where geodesign can be used. So the first is building information modeling, and many of you may have heard of this, but BIM essentially stands for building information modeling. And BIM is a very core concept of any infrastructure planning today. It's actually a mandate that the government is also rolling out, that every project over a certain size needs to have a BIM model. And a BIM model looks something like this. It's actually an internal 3D model of the building. It gives you all the detailing around the structural and the functional aspects of the building. Now, how is BIM related to GIS? Again, the same concept of geodesign. If I make changes in the structural layout of the building, how is it going to impact the external environment? How is it going to impact the demand for resources that the building is going to put? And how does it play out in the context of the wider space? And in India, actually, we've been guilty of not considering this at all. And you will see examples of this everywhere. Like you'll have two malls opposite each other. Now, if they were using geo-design principles, nobody would ever put two malls opposite each other, right? Because of the traffic impact that it would cause. So the more people who consider geospatial data and the impact of geodesign, the better that our planning and architecture will become. Now, now we've jumped into 3D, if you've noticed. So geospatial also works really well in 3D, and that's where applications like this come. So you have solar potential. So everybody knows, renewable energy is something that, everybody is pushing for. So if you have to calculate what is the solar potential on your building rooftop, you can actually use geospatial tools to do that. Now this image looks very simple. So what it's saying is where the red areas are high solar potential, where it's orange or yellow, it's low solar potential. But actually the calculation is quite complex. So if you think about it, first I need to know how the building is, what is the height of the building, what is the slope of the roof. Then I need to know where the building is in the world, because I need to calculate through the year how much sunlight that building will receive. So that's where the geospatial aspect comes in. If you're sitting in Finland or in Canada, you're not going to get as much sunlight as you are in Mumbai or Delhi. But in the same way, even if you're within India, in Mumbai you get lot more rain. So the sun is not available throughout the year because of monsoon. But in Chennai, for example, there's much less of monsoon impact. So again, even within a country, there are a lot of changes. So you need to model that. How much actual solar heat units do you get through the year? Then the next one is, what is the shadow that a building next to me is casting? So if you notice, the building which has those steps actually is casting a shadow on the building behind it. So if that building was a shorter building, the solar potential would come down because the shadow actually is covering part of that roof. And then finally, whether it's south facing, north facing, east facing, west facing roof makes a big difference. As you would know in architecture, the amount of light that you receive depends on which way the roof and the windows are facing, amount of heat as well. Same applies for solar potential. So this is a very good example of how architecture and geospatial data come together to be able to give this kind of answer. And there's some very cool sites in the US. So Boston Solar is something you should definitely check out. For the entire city, they have mapped the solar potential. There's also a Google project called Google Project Sunroof, which has many cities in the US that's mapped with this sort of data. We spoke about shadows. So this is another example of shadow analysis. So if the sun is coming from a certain direction, how much shadow is the building casting? And here, this is an analysis of another city in the US where that middle tower, which is blue and there's a red shadow being cast, is a new planned development. And the new planned development, they want to see how much shadow it's casting on the buildings behind it, because if it's too much of a shadow, the planning authority will not allow that building to be constructed. So this is an example of how geodesign is actually being used in architecture and construction. And finally, how does this all come together? And some of you may have heard of this term digital twin, but digital twin is a very simple concept. Digital twin is the concept of, can I create a replica of my reality? This is Singapore, by the way. So Singapore are one of the first cities in the world that have created a digital twin of their entire city. So what that means is they've taken all the data, the building data, the road data, the trees, and they've converted those into 3D models. And once they convert that into 3D model, it's not just for, like in a movie or an animated film, they actually do analysis with it. So like I said, the shadow analysis, the rooftop solar analysis, they can do what if scenarios. So for example, if a new building was to come up here, what is the impact on traffic? What is the impact on the environment? What is the impact on shadow? They can even do disaster planning. So if there was a storm that raised the water level by 2 feet, how much of my city would get flooded? So digital twin really allows an organization or a country or a city to model what might happen and then take effective measures to combat that if that incident was to happen. And this is again a very close thing to architecture, right? So your architectural models can also go into a digital twin. But GIS is a lot more than just architectural applications. So I wanted to just talk to you about some of these other applications that we work on a day-to-day basis, and how it actually impacts the world. So we spoke about retail. So this is an example of all the Starbucks outlets in LA area. So they have a lot of outlets, and how actually some of these outlets are cannibalizing each other. So cannibalization basically means the store is taking customers from its own other branches because they're too close to each other. So this sort of analysis helps the retailer optimize his distribution. So rather than having too many stores next to each other, he should spread out a little bit more. So based on population and income and traffic, they can make a better decision. Real estate, some of you would have, or many of you would have used housing portal. So this is a screenshot from housing.com. Again, mapping is used extensively now in all of these portals, Magicbricks as well, showing you a map of where the property is, what are the properties nearby, what are the rates for properties in that locality. So this is Bavdan in Pune. Similarly, you have all these maps for across the country. And what mapping actually Google Maps has done for the geospatial industry is made mapping very commoditized, which means everybody today is using maps, right? So whether you are using a Uber app or Swiggy or Magicbricks or housing.com, you are looking at maps. So that way it's made us very prominent. GIS professionals are now highly in demand because mapping is everywhere. So that is real estate, and real estate is another big user of mapping data. Then we have utilities. So utilities means electricity lines or water pipes. They are big users of maps because I need to know how to connect up my network and where demand is and where the supply is. So without mapping that in reality, I sometimes won't even know where the pipes are. And again, in India, this is not well done because you can see that people dig up the road and they don't know where the pipe is. That's because it's not been mapped properly. But in the US, every water pipe, every electricity line is mapped, and therefore they're able to manage that network better. Then you have transportation. So I mentioned Uber and Ola. So what is the traffic looking like right now? You guys will be familiar with this sort of traffic maps. And these traffic maps are daily helping us commute. They are helping us ensure that we avoid traffic. And this is like real-time big data GIS in action. They're capturing data from millions of devices, and then they are figuring out how to optimize the route. So that's how your Uber is able to figure out what is the best way to avoid the traffic. So this is a crowdsourced large geospatial problem that is being solved. Slightly more analytical is this, which is how far. This is an isochrone, which you see on the left, which is a purple polygon. An isochrone basically tells you how far can you get in 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes from that starting location. And this is useful in pizza delivery, or this is useful in planning a school, right? So how much population can I cover within a 10-minute radius around my planned school location? So this is a very, very important concept in urban planning as well, is to how does the road network influence where I should put my key critical buildings. So for example, a fire station needs to have very good access to the road so that it can reach the maximum amount of area within 15 minutes. So these kind of applications are essential in the actual safety and control of disasters in the city. We covered a lot of applications there. The next bit is how do I get geospatial data, or where do I get geospatial data from? So some common ways is collecting it yourself. So there are applications now for iOS and Android which allow you to quickly capture data. So what do I mean by that? You can download this app. Actually, it's a free app. It can use your GPS and it will capture the track. So as you walk around, as you travel around, you can actually capture your track, and then you can export it in a file and upload it to even Google Earth and see where all you've been. And I don't know if you've explored the my location history tracker in Google Maps. You can actually swipe into Google Maps and see where all you've been over the last few days. So that uses a similar feature using your GPS and capturing this data. The next one is how do you capture data from satellites? So you can actually take a satellite image like this. This is Pune city, and you can draw the roads and the buildings. So many of us, when we learn geospatial for the first time, we're given a satellite image and we're asked to draw the lines that we can see for roads, draw the polygons that we can see for buildings. and we can create our own digital representation of the world. Or you can take existing maps and you can convert it. So this is a very old map of the plan of Mumbai. You can take this map and you can do a process called georeference, which is basically overlay this on the real world Mumbai map, and then you can trace it out. You could also get data in different formats like Excel files, images, tables, and these tables can also have information. For example, population data, ward data of population and income and spending patterns across different parts of the city, and that data can be joined with the ward data to create a thematic map. What is a thematic map? Something that looks like this. So this is a thematic map of India by state. So different states are colored in different colors. You could do a same thematic map by, let's say, number of corona cases, for instance, or you can do a thematic map of population of different states. You can also download a lot of data. So there's a GitHub repository. GitHub is a site where a lot of free data is available, called datameet/maps. So go to that site if you want to download this data. This data is available in that site. There are many other geospatial specific sites called GeoCommons or OpenStreetMap where you can download data. So that's where you can get data. Now onto the kind of final part of the presentation. What does the future hold? So what are the things that are happening now and in the future that really will give you new opportunities as you guys come out into the kind of working world? So the first is big data analytics, which is already happening. So Google Maps is doing real-time traffic, it's doing navigation, but this is going to be made multiple times over. So with autonomous cars, you need much more real-time data. You need much more accurate data, because if a computer is driving the car and the data is inaccurate, then there's going to be chances for accidents. So big data analytics is going to take a huge step forward with things like self-driving cars. Then you have crowdsourced data. So crowdsourced data is again an example of how, for example, Google Maps collects data from all Android phones to create a traffic map. That's an example of crowdsourced data. And that's going to become more and more common because everybody has a mobile phone. That's an easy way of sharing data. If any of you have seen the Arogya Setu app, that's another example of crowdsourcing data. You're actually providing information to the government so that they can collate it and figure out where the virus is spreading. Then there's Internet of Things, IoT. Internet of Things is essentially how you can enable devices to become smart, whether it's your fridge or your car or your even things like your toaster, your TV. All of these are now smart devices. And what that means is they can send and receive information through the internet. And this allows you to do all kinds of automation, analysis. So one example is we're working with a sensor company that has a IoT device for measuring the vibration of devices on a cooler. So the rotating coolers that you have. And they are able to send information back to a dashboard that says when that machine is starting to fail. And so we can dispatch a service engineer before that machine even fails. So it's called preventive maintenance. So this sort of use case will now become more and more common. UAVs is the last thing. So UAVs are unmanned aerial vehicles. And again, they've shot to prominence in this COVID thing. So a lot of companies are now looking at surveillance using drones. So I know that in Gujarat, in Maharashtra, the police have been using drones to look at where people are breaking the lockdown and ensuring that people are following social distancing. The other area for UAV applications is surveying. So where there's a lot of forest, for example, or it's a very steep hill, you can actually use a drone to capture that data in a very quick and easy manner. And then the final application on UAVs is how do you do delivery? So how do you take drone data or drone flights and actually deliver parcels? So Amazon is already doing drone delivery in many places in the US. So this is another area which will increase. So that's the end of my presentation. We have, I guess, a few minutes for questions since we started a little late. But if you have any questions, now is the time, and happy to answer anything that you may have. Thank you.
Who wants to go first?
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So what's the accuracy of data in India? Because the population is not that much having that smartphones in use.
Sorry, you broke up actually. Can you repeat your question? I couldn't hear it.
So what's the accuracy of the data in India? Because the like some proportion of the population is only using the smartphones in that huge amount.
Okay, so you're asking about data collection in India because of smartphone penetration. So basically, I mean, India has one of the highest number of smartphones in the world, almost 300 million smartphones, and growing every day. So smartphones is not the only way to capture data. Remember that. So it is only one of the methods. The other methods also have traditional means like surveys. So government does surveys for elections, for example. So every person who's registered on the electoral roll is the data that is available. So population is not only calculated through mobile apps, but you can do it through traditional means like census.
So, but why it's not that affected in India?
Yeah, because I think systems are not digital. Government is not making use of processes and systems that are available. Many of this is still in paper. So you may have seen. Can you guys hear me still? Sorry, I got some connection break. Yeah, okay. So many of the systems in India are still in paper. So you may have experienced this if you ever asked for your property tax record. It's often in a paper format. Whereas in every other country, or pretty much most other countries in the world, it's a digital map that you have access to. So that's the main problem in India, that the government is not really adopted digital technology. It's changing now slowly with Digital India and with other initiatives that the government is doing. It's improving, but the problem is that it's taking time, and the sooner we do it, the better. Because as you see, there are a lot of impact that we are facing because the government is not digitizing the entire process.
Next one.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You told about digital twin, and it's firstly it's affected in like Singapore area. How it's gonna work in India, sir? Like rare countries like India, where that much development is not occurring.
So again, your first part of your question, I couldn't hear properly. So you're comparing Singapore and India. What was the specific question you had?
So how digital twin works in India? Like how it's gonna work if it is?
Okay. Yeah, got it. So many cities in India already, if you may have heard of the smart city initiatives. So smart city initiatives are basically similar examples of digital twin. So if you look at Smart City Mumbai or Smart City Bangalore, also has a lot of 3D models of the city. So it is happening. It's not as advanced as Singapore, obviously, but I think in the next few years, there's been a lot of private and public, funding for building smarter cities, and basically, I think India is not far behind. Maybe 2-3 years ago we were, but now Bangalore city actually has one of the better smart city models in the whole country. So there are a lot of initiatives happening even in India to get to that point. I mean, Singapore is many years ahead, that's for sure. But there are, if you look at any smart city website, you'll see a lot of initiatives towards the digital twin.
sir. Thank you.
Dhruva. Hello.
Yeah, Chandran.
Dhruva, I have a question. Just a small curiosity and doubt.
Sure.
Isn't like, I mean, if you remember 10 years ago when we were in Scotland, so we used to, we used to go to each house number and we could see the live street view and all everything on our gadget, and we could reach to the destination by using any cab or any public transport, right?
Yeah.
So, but we are not able to achieve or reach to that level at all in our country. So, what is the basic reason where we are lacking behind?
So the issue with, so you're referring to Google Street View. So Google Street View, actually they tried to enter India, but the government prevented them from. So basically legal issues, data privacy issues. So government of India told Google that you cannot do Street View in India. So that is one part. So that's why you don't have an equivalent. Second is that the data is not mapped. So as there was a question earlier, India has not really taken the initiative to map it. So in UK, if you remember, you put the house number and postcode, it will go exactly to that house. In India,
exactly.
That's not yet possible. So we are actually working on that problem. How do you take an unstructured address and map it accurately? But it will take time because the data is not digitized. That's the main problem. So all that information is in the postman's head. So when the post goes, he actually knows where the house is. No system actually keeps a record of that. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that way we really hats off to Indian postman. Without any digital gadgets or anything, they do know each and every house by name without even a number of the house.
Correct. Yeah.
And
exactly.
one more thing, in architecture, I saw one of your slide where you were talking about, the sunlight, directions, shadings, and all that. So in case if we are doing some kind of housing project or a planning project, in which software or which application or what is the medium by which we as an architect, not as an engineer, can achieve these datas? Maybe in terms of a visual representation or analytical or data representation easily.
Yeah, so like I said, there are some open tools, like even Google Earth has some basic shadow analysis tools.
Okay.
But the software I was showing you was a software called ArcGIS. So ArcGIS is an Esri product. So that has tools to do solar radiance calculation and things. So that would be the best way to start. So they have a like Autodesk kind of AutoCAD kind of tool, which you can use to create these models and actually generate a 3D output.
So basically, if I have a BIM model, then through the simulation, we will be able to achieve those data.
Yeah. So you just have to export it into import it into ArcGIS and then run the solar calculation model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it gives me all the represent in the pictorial form or the data form, both or anything, something similar to that.
Yeah, both. It will give you both. So because ArcGIS itself is a geospatial platform, it will do all the calculation itself, and it will give you a visualization. You can also export that into data.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Students, go ahead.
I hope that I covered. I hope there were topics there that you already are studying. Yeah.
It was quite informative. That's why I myself was getting multiple doubts. So I'm just waiting with the students to wake up and ask questions. I think some data issues, so things are going slow. So maybe students, please go ahead.
In the BIM, sir, why isn't that applied in the industrial construction in India? As all the data are given in that already, as you told that it's already built in it.
Yeah. So the problem is that again the enforcement of the law is not good in India. So in the UK, for example, any project more than £1 million, they had to have BIM models. But in India, it's not enforced. So the law is there, but if you're building a factory and you don't want to build the BIM model, nobody is going to fine you for that. That's the problem. That's why many of the construction here fails in India, because they've not followed the processes. And if they were using intelligent, building models like BIM, they would have less issues in the future. But the problem is they don't follow, they try to cut corners, and nobody really enforces the laws, right? That's the biggest problem in India. Having said that, there are many buildings. So, for example, Delhi's new railway station was actually designed and executed by foreign company, but it's done with all the BIM models. It's an amazing place. If you go to Delhi in the near future, you should definitely go and visit the new railway station. They've done a fantastic job. Similarly, Delhi Metro, you would know that that's also one of the examples that people talk about worldwide as one of the amazing metro projects that has been done. So there are projects in India that have followed the BIM process and the digital twin and everything. But we need many more projects to follow that. So as you'll know, for example, Bangalore Metro itself has so many issues because they try to cut corners and a lot of legal issues happen. But at the same time, Mumbai Metro has been being done very well. So there are good and bad stories across the country. I think the biggest common thread, as you can see, is the legal and the enforcement of those laws in India. I think that needs to get more strict. The technology is definitely there, and people also know how to use the technology.
Next student.
Good morning, sir. Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Sir, so you have explained about the digital mapping. Is there a way where we students also can experiment with the digital mapping? For example, our college also has a beautiful landscape. So if I want to do a digital mapping of the contour and everything, is there a way like each and everyone can actually experiment with it? Is there any app or something?
Yeah, so there are several actually. So there's a free app for making maps on the desktop called QGIS. So that's Q for Queen and GIS. And QGIS actually is a free, you can go to qgis.com and download it. But you have to collect data. And to collect data, I showed you an example, right? There's an app, GPS tracker app for Android.
Sure.
So you just have to download that data, that app, and when you are walking around the campus, you can capture the data. So you can take a photo, it will capture the lat long. Or if you want to capture contours, you have to go and stand at that location and capture the height, right? And then you can build up your own virtual landscape of the campus. So I would definitely encourage you to try this. Download that Android app and use QGIS. That Android app will give you export in a Excel file. That Excel file you can open in QGIS and you can start creating your own map. It's very simple to do. You just have to spend maybe 1 or 2 days learning how to use that tool. But after that, it's very easy to start creating maps.
Thank you, sir.
I actually have a question, Chandan. Do you guys talk about geodesign in your course at all?
It's too early for us to discuss about. Yes, but yes, we does it's a very project specific domain for us to discuss with. So okay. This does not come as a the regular part of our domain of our architectural course, but then project based, some of the students on interest, if they take up some of the project which requires that domain, then definitely yes, we do discuss about that.
Okay.
We'll wrap up the session. Diksha, you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Okay. I, Diksha, on behalf of East West School of Architecture and the entire fraternity of the institution, extend a hearty vote of thanks to our chief guest, Sir Dhruva, who spared time from his busy schedules to grace the occasion and give his insights. Today, we had an opportunity to hear your thoughts, gain knowledge about geodesigning and digital mapping, and this will surely encourage us in implementing these aspects in our future design projects. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if you have any questions at all, Chandan has my email address. Feel free to reach out. Happy to answer any questions at a later point.
Thank you, Dhruva. Thank you so much. I mean, you accepted our invitation, though we are small in numbers to attend, but we literally had a very good informative session. And and what Saundria has introduced in the beginning is that's an official introduction. But more than that, I mean, as much as I know, he's a football lover. So guys, if you have any question in that regard, also you can throw it to him. I have his contact number.
Yeah.
Right, Dhruva?
Yeah. Anytime. Yeah. So please feel free to reach out to me, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and in other social media as well if you want. Okay.
Right, Dhruva. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Yeah. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.